Hello, biology classes. Today we will look through section 3 of chapter 16. This is evolution as it relates to Darwin and some of his findings, specifically with natural selection. So just a heads up, I got my window open behind me. It's a nice sunny morning and there's robins chirping in the background, so if it gets too loud or something, I'll shut it. But if you hear that, just be thankful we are hopefully done with winter now. All right, so back in 1858 was when Darwin and Wallace had their big race to see who could talk about evolution first. And you guys read a little bit about that in an article, so we don't need to elaborate more on that. Darwin's great contribution was to describe the process of artificial selection in nature, as opposed to in a controlled environment. So some of his conclusions that we use, members of a population must compete to obtain resources. And so what we're saying there is within a population of species, it's a struggle. It's a struggle for staying alive and existing. And a vital role in that is individual variation in their structure, appearance, and so on. So an adaptation is any heritable characteristic that increases the ability to survive and reproduce in its environment. And some of those things that we think of as adaptations, claws, color, camouflage, mimicry, and many others, are things that should make sense to you as far as something that could help you to survive and reproduce. So first we'll look at mimicry. I think most of you are familiar with mimicry or have heard of it, but we have a butterfly in our region called the monarch. And monarchs are black and orange, and that should be a reminder to you that in nature, colors sometimes function as warnings, and contrasting colors such as a skunk black and white or a bee black and yellow indicate danger. And while we don't consider monarchs dangerous, because they feed on milkweed as caterpillars, they build up a distasteful flavor or a toxin, and birds instinctively know not to touch monarch butterflies or eat monarch butterflies. That orange and black is a warning to them, such as that robin chirping outside. What birds don't know is there's also a butterfly there called the viceroy, which looks at a quick glance very much like a monarch, but it is actually very tasty and will not make birds sick. So this is an example of mimicry. The butterfly did not consciously decide one day to try to look like monarchs. Instead, ones that closely resembled monarchs tended to be less likely to be consumed by predators, and we had a slow change in the population over probably millions of years. Another example is in the coral snake and the milk snake. Okay, one being venomous, one not being venomous. And there's a little rhyme there you can see to help you remember the patterns and whether or not it's dangerous or not. I think most of us, if we saw either snake in the grass as we were stepping, would probably be frightened, especially if you're scared of snakes. Camouflage is another one. We can see here in the upper right a chameleon or lizard type creature. If you can see it, looks a lot like a leaf, doesn't it? There's his head, leg, back, tail, right here. And here is a moth, and we'll talk more about this moth in a little bit. But it is, easy to walk right by that thing and not see it if it's sitting still, and that's a big part of that too. All right, so let's talk about survival of the fittest. A word that we'll use here now is called fitness, and I know that is a lot different when we talk about it in terms of athleticism or health, but in evolution or in biology, fitness is how well an organism can survive and reproduce. So differences in adaptations can affect this. Organisms that are well suited for a particular environment have a very high fitness, and ones that are not suited or maybe don't reproduce before their end of their life are said to have low fitness. And the difference in the rates of those survivals and reproduction is called the survival of the fittest. Now, take note here at the bottom, survival means a lot more than just the animal staying alive. Okay? Survival means staying alive and also reproducing and also passing those adaptations to the next generation. So here we're starting to see a great connection between our genetics chapter and our DNA chapter and evolution. Okay, they really, really go hand in hand. This diagram got a little more blurry than I had hoped. This is right out of your textbook, and that's the reason I use this in class, even though currently we don't have any textbooks, but we have a natural selection diagram showing grasshoppers, and in this first box you can see we have a grasshopper laying some eggs, and in the background, work with me here guys, we've got yellow grasshoppers and green grasshoppers. And so we get a variation, and I think you guys can understand that if you just would look around your classroom. You know, we all look a little different and things, and that's what we get here with these grasshoppers. And obviously, the green ones probably are going to blend in a little better, right? Bird comes in, tries to snatch up some grasshoppers to eat. Which ones will it grab? Whatever's easiest, really. It comes down to animals are trying to stay alive. And so this bird's going to take whatever food it can get fastest. So here it shows it eating a yellow. Does it mean it's only going to eat yellow? Of course not. If a green one hops here, bird might get it. Absolutely true. But over time and over a bigger sample set, we should see that more yellow grasshoppers are taken out of the equation than more green ones. And over time, we might see a shift in that population. And that really is what evolution is. Okay, we're not saying these grasshoppers are doing anything magical or anything unexplained. We're just saying, what are we seeing in terms of the whole population of those grasshoppers? So, natural selection. This is a process by which organisms with variations most suited to their environment survive and leave more offspring. Remember here, the environment is what is influencing the fitness, not a farmer or an animal breeder. So if we go back to the previous picture, which ones are more suited to their environment and which one will leave more offspring? Common sense would tell us the green ones, right? And remember, the environment influences it, not a farmer, not a breeder. So important here is the environment, the grass in the background. Now, let's look at this same example in a different environment, a sandy environment, or a year where there's a heavy drought, where we don't have a lot of rainfall and the grass is very dried up. Could that result in a different shift? Absolutely. All right, so the steps in natural selection are as follows. Natural selection occurs in any situation where more individuals are born than can survive. And in nature, that makes sense because food chains, which we'll get to in ecology, some creatures function as a food source for others. So not every individual is going to survive. There is natural heritable variation, which means that in a population of a species, let's say 1,000 of a particular species, they're not all going to be exactly alike, right? I think that your chapter on genetics should help you sort that out. There is variable fitness among individuals, so some do have a better chance of making it and reproducing and passing on their traits. And well-adapted individuals survive and reproduce to produce highly fit individuals. And the big thing to remember here, guys, is evolution is not perfect. It's not perfection. Nature's not perfection. It's more of tinkering. So think about if you were in your garage and you want to build something, and you build a masterpiece. It could happen, right? But more than likely what will happen is someone's out in their garage and they're just kind of putzing around with different parts and putting things together and finding a solution. And it may not be the ideal solution, but it might work. And that's kind of what evolution is. Tinkering. All right, the classic peppered moth example. So this took place in Europe, England, I believe, in the Industrial Revolution, and we started off with 2 varieties of the peppered moth, and they call it the peppered moth because it looks like salt and pepper spots and splotches, and those spots and splotches are meant to help camouflage them against a tree trunk. Okay, so here's a tree trunk, the modeled appearance of a tree trunk. Well, what happened during the Industrial Revolution is pollution and soot from the coal was left a deposit on the trees. And so the trees went from a light colored bark to a dark colored bark. So initially, there was a high percentage of moths that were lighter because it helped them blend in with the trees, as you can see here. That's a moth right there. This moth that's darker, its genetic traits produced a dark color. Maybe it was a recessive, who knows, stuck out. Those were more likely to get caught and eaten by birds and things. Once those trees' appearance changed, okay, now it's a different story. Now the darker moths blend in and the lighter ones do not. And so there is a shift. The dark moths now fit the best. They're better suited to survive. And the frequency of alleles for color changed in the entire gene pool. And they're still studying this, actually. I'm reading a book on evolution. Actually, I shouldn't say I'm reading a book on evolution. I have a book on evolution where it actually reinvestigates this case and looks at it even more in depth with modern technology. And it's one of those classic examples. Now, do the moths consciously think, hey, I blend in? Of course not. They have no idea, right? All right, common descent. Darwin proposed that living species are descended with modification from common ancestors. This is called descent with modification. Next week, I'm going to share a video with you on the evolution of whales, okay, and wolves, and we'll talk about that after we see the video. But life on Earth has been here for a very long time, okay? 2 other scientists that we had talked about and their theories. So Darwin pointed to the fossil record, and he drew the first evolutionary tree, which is sort of like a family tree, showing the relation of organisms, not individuals, but species. And all species, living or extinct, are descended from an ancient common ancestor. So here's Darwin's first tree. Now I know when you look at that, it's very simple. It might look like something you would doodle in class. Okay, or some strange creature here with these little legs and things, but he says, I think, this is his actual document, kind of cool. But the way to read that is that closely related species are closer on a tree and farther away species are less related. And so here is a example, and this example actually references one of the most common misconceptions about evolution. And some of you mentioned this in your exit slip the one day. Some people argue, well, I don't think I came from a monkey, so I don't agree with evolution. Well, that's a misconception. Evolution never said you came from a monkey. Instead, what it does say is that 6 million years ago or so, chimpanzees and humans shared an ancestor, which no longer exists. Gorillas and chimps and humans shared one 8 million years ago. I'm running out of time, so until next time, stay healthy and active. Thank you for watching. We'll continue next week. Thank you.